in the second part of the 20th century, there have been many composers who developed own musical languages, which, besides the big aesthetic differences from each other, have in common the particularity to be the result of an intellectual research. Following a different path, the Italian composer Salvatore Sciarrino, born in Sicily in 1947, is one of the few contemporary artists who start from a totalizing intuition, from the vision of a very personal world of sounds, and for whom composing means actually to search an effective way of bringing this intuition into sounds. This is probably the real reason why Sciarrino is one of the very few modern composers who really revolutionized the playing techniques of almost every musical instrument. In fact, when you are concentrated in a theoretical research, like for example the composers of the School of Darmstadt, who were primarily interested in finding a new European common musical language after the tragedy of the war, you won't probably be too much interested in finding new instrumental techniques, which aren't, of course, a theoretical problem, but are instead much more connected with the body and flesh of a musical instrument, with the reality of sound. So the starting point of a composer like Sciarrino is a particular sound landscape hunting him, and which inspires him to find a new way to play all the instruments, to be able to obtain those sounds which existed before only in his mind. But let's try to describe, as far as we can do it with words, the music of Sciarrino. His mysterious world is clearly connected to the silence. But, and this is an essential point, the music of Sciarrino is connected to the silence in a theatrical way, because it does not evoke the silence, but it represents it. And this is a fundamental difference. Some critics have called Sciarrino's music an ecology of sound, also because, since it is extremely rarefied, silent, and made of almost nothing, this music might help us in finding again a lost quality of perception, like a kind of music therapy. But this idea of ecology of sound implies, in my opinion, the naive and misleading preconception that the representation of something silent and rarefied might increase your quality of listening, which is so absurd as to believe that looking at a blank page might increase your capacity of seeing. The opposite idea is much more true, in my opinion. A music made of rarefied elements will eventually risk much more than any other music to become a simulacrum of the act of listening, because it is much easier to project our thoughts on such fragile landscape, giving us the illusion that we are listening while we are actually completely closed in ourselves. With other words, we should be aware that there is a huge difference between a music which sounds close to the silence and a music which has an empathic relationship to the silence. If I play one note and I listen to its resonance with all my human being, and after a long moment I play a second note, you will not only hear two notes, but also, and first of all, the space between them. And as a musician, being there, listening deeply to the space between those two notes, makes this space alive. It makes alive that silence which contains and embraces those sounds and us. In this sense, any composition shows us if and how the composer was empathically listening to the silence while writing the piece, and a good performer should be able to recreate that empathic attitude while playing the piece. So, after having made this distinction, let's go back to the music of Sciarrino, which is, to me, like a theatrical backdrop, or like a scenic stage, which envelopes the listener in a mysterious and highly stylized world, a world made of almost nothing, tremors, and impalpable vibrations, and which is like a painting of both the worlds outside and inside the listener. That's why this sound landscape is often based on the transfiguration of physiological elements, the breath, the heartbeat, giving almost the impression that you are inside someone's mind. And it's based on the evident use of primordial musical structures like the accumulation and multiplication of some elements or the superposition of different temporalities. Also, in his vocal pieces, which by the way represent a big part of Sciarrino's catalogue, particularly important is the strict connection between text and the music, almost like in a madrigal of the 16th century. For example, one of my very favorite pieces, the wonderful Quaderno di Strada for baritone and ensemble. In this piece, there is a constant connection of music and text. For example, on the word smarrimento, which means to lose, to misplace, but also to get lost, to lose your way. There are many musical lines which go without a direction and seem to lose themselves. Or the word sbranare, tear to pieces, is expressed from hard multiphonic dissonant sounds. On the sentence smarrita la misura, we have lost the measure. The same musical gesture is repeated so many times, too many times actually, so that you really think the composer has lost the sense of measure, and so on. So I would dare to say that this music is extremely descriptive, and that it describes a world made of completely new sounds, but which at the same time we can recognize as familiar because its form is almost naturalistic. Another important point, underlined by Sciarrino himself, is that his music has the unicity of being without rhythm, without melody, and without harmony. And personally, I think it is interesting to underline how this characteristic fits perfectly our modern time, which has developed an allergy to any form of hierarchy. To compose for the composers of the past centuries means precisely to establish musical hierarchies. So I like to see Sciarrino as the composer who was able to give a fascinating artistic form to this impossibility, the modern impossibility to take the responsibility, so to speak, of a rhythm, of a melody, and of harmony. Sciarrino started his artistic career as a painter. Maybe also for this reason, he's often compared to artists like Lucio Fontana, Alberto Burri, or even Kandinsky, and we know from his interviews that Sciarrino indeed loves them. But Kandinsky was a religious symbolist in whose paintings every shape and color is assigned a very specific meaning. Fontana and Burri were conceptual artists, and for both, the expressed ideas were more important than the aesthetic and perceptual power of the artwork itself. I might be wrong, but Sciarrino seems to me to be quite far from both attitudes. If I should choose one painter to make a comparison with Sciarrino, I would probably name Arcimboldo, the great Italian Mannerist painter of the 16th century. It's easy to recognize the shape of the unforgettable faces painted by Arcimboldo, which are composed using fruits, legumes, or flowers, creating a kind of surrealism ante litteram. And I think it is with a similar mannerism that Sciarrino reconstructs a transfigured world. But he doesn't only paint this world, he also describes the process of listening to it. And all this as it could be heard at the same time, as he says, from the ear of a fly and from the ear of a giant. Such unusual perspectives, as well the eccentricity of forms, and almost unrealistic atmosphere, which underlines movements and feelings, unusual colors. These are some qualities of the mannerism which are shared, in my opinion, also by Sciarrino's music. And as a great successor of the Italian artistic tradition, Sciarrino knows perfectly how to organize his musical landscapes with the greatest sense of dramaturgy. So I would say that with unprecedented hubris, the music of Sciarrino tries to describe and to stage the act of listening, trying to unveil, to desecrate a mystery, the mystery of the act of listening, which is impossible to penetrate. And it is exactly in this almost sacrilegious quality of his music that resides, in my opinion, its endless, fascinating, charming, and astonishing power.